The word tetragrammaton is typically, if you look at the root word, the tetra refers to four, right? The four faces of a tetrahedron. Typically, the translation is then done as tetra for four, grammaton for grammar. And grammar or letters is interchangeable, and so it's the four letters of God. Yahweh, Y-H-W-H. And grammaton was what was intriguing me, so I digged a little deeper, and I found that actually the word grammaton has a deeper root than grammar, in which it refers to the weight of an object, and that's where the word gravity and gram came out of. So all of a sudden, you could have a different interpretation of this word that says tetrahedron gravitation, right? Okay, something along those lines, right? I know that might sound very, a long leap, right? But this was where I started. And I was really keen on continuing my research because it was promising. They were talking about tetrahedrons or triangles on the seat of God, and they were describing tetragrammatons for the force of God. And I was getting, inspired, to say the least. So I continued to research, and with this word tetragrammaton, I was able to look further and dig deeper, and I was intrigued. There's a lot of sacred societies that have a lot of information and all this. One of them, and certainly there seemed to be an oral tradition that was passed in the rabbinic tradition from one to the other throughout the ages, that wasn't allowed to be written. It was very clear in the Bible that the name of God or the source of God, whatever this God was not allowed to be just discussed publicly. It was very sacred, and it had to be transferred from one initiate to the other in very sacred way. And its traditions that transferred the information were called Kabbalistic traditions. So I started to study the Kabbalah and the Kabbalistic tradition and what they had to say about the Tetragrammaton. And when I did, I came across various esoteric manuscripts that we're going to see in a minute. But the other thing that puzzled me is that in many instances, the word Tetragrammaton and Ark of the Covenant and all this, in the description of what was going on there, it was describing something very interesting to me, because it kept on talking about the force of God, or the Tetragrammaton, having a vortex of fire or a vortex of clouds above it. And it describes it in the Bible in various instances. And it says that, that is where the power of God is manifest to man. And for instance, in this graphic, they show this is when the Hebrews were going through the desert for 40 years. They had a temporary tent system to host the ark in the middle, and they called the tabernacle. And they show here the vortex of cloud rising above the Ark of the Covenant that's in the back of the tabernacle. Just so you understand, this is the fire of sacrifices that are in front, and you see the smoke just dispersed. But in this case, it's very organized vortex type of smoke or clouds that orbit on the top of this object. From my previous studies and from my physics
concepts, I had come to conclude that, for instance, the black sun or the black crystal described in other civilization may have been given by the sun god to humans as a very advanced technology, like a little sun in a box, a singularity created artificially inside a stone or a crystal that contained plasma dynamics spinning at high angular velocity, generating a torque in space-time, producing gravitational effects and energy effects. If that is true, then you would expect that on the top and the bottom of that structure, you would see vortices appear, columns of clouds or columns of light appear because of the high velocity of the space-time angular momentum along the side of that object. At the north and south pole of that object, large vortices would be produced.
There's a chapter here, if you want references, so you can look it up yourself, in Numbers. It's called the cloud above the tabernacle, and it described that vortex cloud above the tabernacle. There's chapters where the sons of Aaron get struck by the Ark of the Covenant and die, and Moses is called into the tabernacle and instructed to never let anybody go in there without permission, because the vortex of the Ark of the Covenant, if it's not dealt with appropriately, can kill. There's all sorts of things like that happen in the Bible that, were striking. But the thing is that I started to realize that when you read the Bible, the Ark of the Covenant, this box-like object, was supposed to have been built at the foot of Mount Sinai after Moses crossed the Red Sea. So I was confused because when I read the crossing of the Red Sea, I was struck that it said here, by day the Lord went ahead of them. They are going towards the Red Sea, fleeing from Egypt. It says, by day the Lord went ahead of them in a pillar of cloud to guide them on their way, and by night in a pillar of fire to give them light, so that they could travel by day or night. Neither the pillar of cloud by day, nor the pillar of fire by night left in its place in front of the people. So it's describing Moses following this vortex of cloud, and at night it would light up, this vortex of fire, through the desert going towards the Red Sea. But the description of the same vorticular action and the same description of this cloud thing, the cloud pillar, is given when it's describing the Ark of the Covenant. So I realized, wait a minute, maybe the Word of God, the information of God that was not allowed to be discussed, was the part about the source of the energy of the ark, not the box. The box was built afterwards to put that energy source in it so they could travel through 40 years in the desert. I started to think maybe these are two different objects. And Moses is following something, a power source, something that's creating a vortex in space, and it's coming out of Egypt. And then I realized, wait a minute, Moses was son of Pharaoh for 40 years, initiated in the highest level of initiation of the Egyptian, before he realized that he was Hebrew and left with the tribes of Israel. So if there was a power source, if the pyramids of Egypt were not just built to bury pharaohs, which I believe weren't built to do that at all, and were actually shielding device or resonating cavities, resonating space-time in a very specific geometric structure, but that they were missing their power source at the center.